Hi, I'm Stacy Sager.
And I'm Rachel Sager.
We're here today to interview our grandparents, Joy and Richard Sager. We are related to them through their youngest child, Judd Sager, who's our father. Today's date is Wednesday, June 25th, 2008.
All right, first of all, we want to thank you guys so much for doing this.
We should be thanking you.
Well, our first question is just to please state your full name, Grandma, including your maiden name. So why don't you go ahead and do that?
Joy Pseudo Sager.
Did you have a middle name?
I did, but I've dropped it. I did have, yeah.
What was it?
Joy Beth.
Okay. And Grandpa?
Richard Sager,
Never had a middle.
born in Chicago, Illinois, in 1921.
Okay. Grandma, why did you drop your middle name?
That's a good question. Because I didn't like signing it on the checks. It was too much writing and so on. So I just said Joy Sager.
Okay. Okay, so can you guys please name all of your relatives' names as far back as you can remember, each of their relations to you, and where they're all from? As much as you can remember.
What do you mean where they're from?
What
Where were they
country?
born? Oh, what
Yeah,
country?
like
Oh.
your ancestors as far
Oh,
back.
All right. You want to go first?
No, you go ahead.
How far back can we go? I can go back to grandparents, not great-grandparents. My father's family was in Russia. My father came over as a grown man, but his family stayed in Russia. And so we never knew them. We never knew his mother or his sisters. He took my mother to Russia years after they were married so that his mother could meet his bride, as he always called her, his bride. I can go back to on my mother's side to her sisters and brothers. I don't think I can go back any further than that.
Okay, whatever you remember. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have pictures of them on the wall. I should put their names under them. She was one of, Uncle Ed, Uncle Ben, Uncle Bill. She had 3 brothers and 1 sister. So there were 5 of them in her family. She was the oldest. Did I say Uncle Ed? Did I say Ed? She had Uncle Ed, Uncle Bill, Uncle Ed, Uncle Bill, Uncle, who else was it? Anyway, where was I? So
So if you could just state their full names, including
full-
your mother's name.
and her sibling names? Her
If you
siblings'
remember.
names?
And her parents' names, if you remember those.
Yeah, her father's name was Sam, and he was one of 11.
Oh my gosh.
His name was Barron, so my mother's maiden name was Barron. And Sioux City, Iowa was full of Barrons because they all lived there.
Is that B-A-R-O-N?
Baron. And they were a wonderful bunch. All of those brothers had the best time teasing people and having fun with people. They were just a wonderful group. And I knew all of them. And their sisters, they had 3 sisters who also lived in Sioux City. Was full of all of our relatives, Sioux City, Iowa, because it was on the other side too, my father's side, that he had brought over from Russia. He brought over his sister Sarah, his sister Esther, his brother Noah, and his brother Nate, and who else? I think that was it. Esther, Sarah, Noah, and Nate. He brought them all over from Russia, and they all came to Sioux City. And they all made their life there, although Uncle Nate moved around. He moved to Madison and to other small, he was in the ladies' retail business. And they were all great people. We were very, very fond of them. They were just very wonderful. And in fact, Uncle Noah and Uncle Nate lived in our house in Aberdeen, South Dakota, because they weren't married, and my mother was very hospitable and had them in her house for years and years until they left and until they got married. Uncle Noah didn't get married until some time later. And he was the father of Tom Sudo. I don't know if you know. And they lived in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. That's where Tom was born and raised. They were in the ladies' ready-to-wear business too. That's enough for me, isn't it? Shouldn't
Anything.
anything?
Keep going.
Just
If you have more.
Oh, I can keep going for a long time. I mean,
Okay.
how far do you want me to
Well,
go?
can we hear more about your father, what his name was?
His name
and
was
his siblings?
Samuel Asher Sudo,
Okay.
and he was in business in Aberdeen, South Dakota. He met my mother in Sioux City, Iowa, and she was American born. My father was Russian born. And so he always felt that he was not quite good enough for my mother because my mother was American born and spoke English beautifully, and he didn't know. But he went to school and he learned, and until he could write well and speak well, so that they wouldn't call him a greenhorn. The ones that came over from Russia or from anywhere and then stayed in the States were called greenhorns until they got acclimated to the States and so on. So that was, and they settled in Aberdeen because my father was looking for a place for business. And they were living in Sioux City, actually, my mother and father. And he went out looking for places to have a retail business. And he landed in Aberdeen. I don't know why it had more to offer or why he liked it better than any other place, but that's what he did. And that's where I was born. I was the only one that was born in Aberdeen. And being the baby, I was born there. The others were all born in Sioux City, Iowa. But I'm glad I was born in Aberdeen. It was wonderful. It was a small town. And although it had very few Jewish people, there were about 25 Jewish families, and they supported a synagogue and a rabbi who was also a teacher and what was called a shochet. He did the slaughtering of the animals to make them kosher. And so they had kosher meat in Aberdeen, and most of the community there was American born, but even so, they all, 95% of them kept kosher, which was very unusual. Okay, so.
Well, actually, Grandma, we're going to continue on with you. A few more questions, and then we're going to go back and get all of this from Grandpa.
I hope so, because I feel like I'm doing enough.
That's okay. It's your time for right now, and then we'll get back to Grandpa. So we've talked about your parents. Can we hear a little bit about your siblings?
Oh, sure.
All of their names,
Sure.
ages.
Sure. I was the baby, as I have said before. I had 2 sisters and a brother. My brother, thank God, is still alive. He's 94 years old. But one of my sisters was older than he, and one of them was younger. One of them was, the oldest one was Dina Sudo Steinberg. She married and lived in Elgin, married Dr. D. Lewis Steinberg.
Elgin, where is that?
Elgin, right outside.
Oh, okay.
Right, Elgin,
In Illinois. Okay.
Yeah. And that's where her 2 sons were born. Actually, they were probably born in Chicago at Reese Hospital because they were both preemies. You know what a preemie is?
Mm-hmm.
A premature? They were each 3 pounds.
Wow.
And at that time, that was something that was scary. But they both came through beautifully, And the younger one, Steve's eyes are weak because of that. But the older one, Gabriel, is fine. So they lived in Elgin because Lou, her husband, was what do you call him? Superintendent of the Elgin State Hospital, right?
Right.
And the Elgin State Hospital was for people that were mentally ill. And that's what he was. He was a psychiatrist. And they lived in this great big, well, it wasn't a mansion, but it was a very big building. And the patients were all around, which to me was a little bit scary, but Dina was wonderful and she took it all in stride. And that's where they lived. And their two sons were born there, and they lived there for many years.
And Dina, how do you spell that?
D-E-N-A.
Okay.
She was the oldest.
Okay.
Then was Joe, my brother Joe. He was sort of the pet because he had 3 sisters. And when you have one boy and 3 sisters, that's incidentally, they say that that's why I was called Joy, to make up for that I wasn't a boy, because he was all set for a brother. And they were so disappointed that they made up, or they didn't make up, but they named me Joy to take the place. And he's taken it out on me ever since. But we have a good relationship. But Joe was the apple of everybody's eye. And my father, who was not a poor merchant, but he wasn't an affluent merchant in Aberdeen, sent him to Harvard, and all of them had, and then from Aberdeen, my sister Dina went to Goucher, which was practically unheard of. I mean, in Aberdeen, who ever heard of Goucher? Anyway, she went to Goucher, my brother went to Yale, to Harvard, Joe, and then the second sister, Miriam, went to Northwestern, and I was left without any funds. So I went to Mundelein, which was here in Chicago. Anyway, so they were all away at school. So then my mother decided they're all away in Chicago, and she wanted to have everybody together again. So she really made my father, who was a small town merchant all his life, pick up and come to Chicago and go into business in Chicago, which was a very difficult thing for him. Merchandising and selling and so on are different in a small town and a big town. But he did it and stuck it out for a few years until he really couldn't do it anymore. He didn't have any more money. He lost a lot of money. And so my mother and I and my father went back to Aberdeen. The others were all in school, in college. And after that, when I graduated high school, I went to college at that time, when they all were in school in Chicago, my mother decided we should move to Chicago so she could have them all together. Yeah, that's what happened. So she made my dad pick up and move to Chicago, which he did, and which he had a tough time doing because he wasn't used to doing business in a big city. But that lasted for a few years, and then he just couldn't stick it out anymore. He lost too much money. So he went back to Aberdeen, and my mother went back to Aberdeen, and I went back to Aberdeen, and the others all stayed in Chicago. And they all got married, and I was too young to get married, but I had met Grandpa, pursuing isn't the word. What do I want? Very
I don't know.
aggressive and very huh? What's it?
Aggressive.
Aggressive, yeah. And he really didn't give me a chance to know too many others, but I tried a little, and he fixed me up with a couple, but he didn't see. He saw to it that it didn't it didn't go anywhere.
Well, we're actually going to get more into that, but
Definitely.
for right now, we want to know just some more details about your childhood. Like, would you say in general you had a good relationship with your parents and your siblings?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You were close?
Yeah, not my mother as well as my father. I was the apple of my father's eye because I helped him in the store. The others were away at school, and I went to the store. I don't know if that was because, but anyway. And I walked with him on winter nights. He always had to go down to the store to be sure that the lights were on and the door was locked. And he always took a walk, and that's where I've gotten mine, as you may understand, my love of walking. But in Aberdeen in the winter, it was very cold and lots of snow. And rain or snow or cold or hot, he went down every night to check the store. Be sure the lights were on, be sure the doors were locked, be sure everything was safe and okay. And I went down with him. We walked in the middle of the street sometimes. There was so much snow. The street was the only place you could get through. And it was cold, but I went with him.
Can you maybe tell us some other traditions that your family had, or some really significant memories you have as a child during your childhood, or required events you had to go to, dinners that you maybe were required to go to, anything of that sort?
Anything like, well, we always had everything at our house. I mean, the Pesach Seder was at our house, and Friday night was at our house, and we were there. My mother and father always kept a kosher house, and there was a synagogue and a rabbi and a Hebrew school that I went to, but it was a wonderful time. It was a town that didn't know anything about anti-Semitism, but nothing. We were one of 20, as I said, about 25 Jewish families. And my father belonged, I don't know if you know the names of half of these things, Rotarian and Kiwanis and, what's some of the others? And Rotarian, Kiwanis,
That's probably it.
they're the main ones, but those were community organizations that did service to the community. Good organizations. But I must tell you just one thing that I hope you'll understand, because my father was the only Jewish member of these groups, and they had luncheons once a week or once every 2 weeks or whatever, and they knew that he would not eat unkosher meat. So they always saw to it that he had a piece of fish. And no business, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. They hadn't put themselves out. It was just a very wonderful, considerate thing that they were doing for him. And that's what they were. We were always excused, of course, for the Jewish holidays in school. And it wasn't that we felt out of the group or that it was out of the ordinary. We were all one group, and it didn't matter that we were Jewish. I went to my girlfriend's house every Christmas, and she had this beautiful big Christmas tree, and I'd sit with her and while she opened the presents, and it was just a matter of course. I mean, it was just not anything special.
So when you were growing up, what were your relationships like with your siblings? And all siblings fight, so I'm curious to know like what punishments were like with your family. What was typical if more of your siblings got in trouble more than others? What things did you get in trouble for?
Well, the ones that got in trouble the most were or Joe and Miriam because they were the closest in age. Dina was away at school almost as they got older, and I was the baby. And I can remember one time when Joe was chasing Miriam down the stairs, and it was a curved staircase, and she ran into the wall, and she had a memento of that occasion for the rest of her life. She had a bad scar over her eye. But I don't remember. My mother and I got into a lot of arguments. I don't know why. But when my dad came home, he took care of it. I mean, it was over. I'd be upstairs in the bedroom crying because my mother wouldn't let me do something or other, and he would come up and see that I came downstairs for dinner and so on and so forth. So it didn't last very long. But I don't remember. Oh, if Aunt Miriam were alive, she would tell you what a pain I was because I was the little sister and she had to drag me all over wherever she went. Mm-hmm. And she just, of course, hated that. So I don't think I was very much in favor with her. but she did what they said she had to do, and I went wherever she went.
And just for the record, could you state your siblings' full names and their spouses' full names?
There were the four of us. Mm-hmm. I was the baby. Dina was the oldest.
And her full name?
Her full name was Dina. I don't remember her middle name, if she had a middle name. Dina. I don't think she had a middle name.
That's okay.
Joe was next, and he was Joseph Zalman, pseudo, Z-A-L, Zalman, Z-A-L-M-A-N, Zalman. Miriam was Miriam Zlotta, mm-hmm. Z-E-L-O-T-T-A. Isn't that a beautiful name?
Yeah,
Zlotta.
yes.
So she was also Miriam Z, and Joe was Joe Z. And I was Joy Beth.
And each of their spouses' names?
We all took our spouse's name.
Can you say their full names?
In those days, women didn't take their husband's names so much. Dina was Mrs. D. Lewis Steinberg. Joe was Zalman pseudo, Joseph Zalman pseudo.
What was his wife's name?
Shirley, who incidentally has the same birthday that I do. Not the year, but the same day. And we are both left-handed.
Wow.
Miriam.
I'm sorry, can you say Shirley's last name if you know it? If not, that's
Her
okay.
maiden name?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Heller,
Okay.
H-E-L-L-E-R. She was at Northwestern when Miriam was, and Miriam introduced them. Mm-hmm. She was a sorority sister of Miriam's, mm-hmm. and Miriam introduced them. Then that comes to me, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't meet any, I was young, so I didn't meet anybody until we got to Chicago. And my mother saw to it that we all met somebody that we eventually married. And that's why Grandpa says that's why she moved everybody to Chicago, to get everybody married. Right?
Right.
You can't argue with him too much because that's exactly what happened.
Okay, so our next question for you is we want to hear about the apartment or house or wherever you lived in growing up. Things like, did you have your own room? Was it nice? Just describe it a little bit.
I was born at home, not in the hospital. I was born at home. Yeah.
In the bathroom?
In the bathroom? No. No, not in the bathroom, David. I was born in the house in which we lived, 1115 South J. It was a wonderful house, I thought, until I went back not long ago and saw how small it was. Don't go back. Let that be a lesson to you. Don't go back. But it served its purpose for us, the four of it, with one bathroom. One bathroom for 3 girls and a boy and parents. You can imagine how my father, who had to get to work, the poor man, my brother still talks about it, 3 girls in one bathroom, and he having to get in. And the best story about him is that the janitor of school, of grade school, would see him coming, and he was always late, and he always said it was because of his sisters, because he couldn't get in the bathroom. So the janitor held the bell until he got to school, and then he rang the bell, that the late bell. Before that, he didn't do it. He had such a good excuse, which was legitimate. I mean, he was right. We were all in the bathroom before he got in there.
So there was one bathroom. Did you guys have your own rooms, or did you share?
There was one bathroom, one room for Dina and Miriam, and one room, the back bedroom, where incidentally I was born, was like 2 rooms. In fact, they added the second room when they knew I was coming, or my mother was pregnant, and that's where I was born. And the back room was my brother's room, and the room in front of it was mine. So we more or less had our own. And then, at that time, we lived near the college in Aberdeen. There was a Northern Normal State Teachers College in Aberdeen, and we were just a block from it. So we always had a student that did babysitting for us and had a room. So she had one room, my 2 sisters had another room, and my brother and I had this sort of double sort of thing, and my parents, of course, had a room, all with one bathroom.
Okay.
Fun.
So now we'd like to get into school. First, if you can remember the name and the town. And then anything else. Mode of transportation, if you walked, if you were driven, if there was a bus. And then going into what your favorite subjects were, some of your friends, activities, what a typical school day was like. Anything you can remember. If you can start with the name, that'd be great.
The name of the school?
Yes.
Simmons. Simmons.
Elementary school?
Elementary school. And then the junior high was just Aberdeen Junior High and Aberdeen High School, which I left as a sophomore and moved to Chicago. But we walked. Aberdeen wasn't that big, but in the winter it got cold. And you've heard stories of people, parents telling their children they walked through knee-high and so on. We did.
How long of a walk was it for you?
It was a good half hour to junior, and to high school. Incidentally, I might mention now, so that it doesn't get lost, my father never drove a car. Never drove a car. He walked. The irony is that he was killed in a car accident. It's just so ironic, because he never drove a car. Anyway, we walked to school. My mother drove. My mother did all the driving, of course, because my father did. She drove us to Chicago one year for a vacation, and she did something wrong. I guess she turned, or shouldn't have turned, or whatever it was. So the officer came over to the car, the officer that was on the beat, and stamped up to the window and said, "People in South Dakota can read, can't they?" her face turned to red, I'm sure, and she said, I suppose there was a sign, no left turn or something, and she made a left turn. Anyway, that's the great story about her driving and being in the big city and so on.
How about some of your favorite subjects?
None. None. I wanted to go into speech when I got into college. That I did want to do. But something interfered all the time and didn't allow me to pursue as much as I wanted. So that went down the drain.
How about some of your friends in school? And if you could just describe a typical school day.
Like anything, any other, I think. We took our lunch, and no, we came home for lunch. I can remember my mother making a pile of egg salad sandwiches, especially on Monday, because Monday was wash day. So she was in the basement washing clothes most of the time. We were home for lunch, Miriam and I. And she had a pile of egg salad sandwiches like this that we both just dove into. And I've loved egg salad sandwiches ever since. Anyway, we walked. We walked to school. We walked home from school. When my mother was not home, she was at the store helping my dad. So she couldn't, he was in the ladies ready to wear business. So she was there helping him. So there was no car available. I mean, nobody to, I remember before I really had learned how to drive, she called and said, go pick up the car. It was at the gas station being fixed, I think, or something. I was 14, I think, at the most. And I got the car and I drove it down to her.
How old were you when you got your license?
Oh, not till about 16.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I knew how to drive when I was 14.
Did you have any close friends in school?
Yeah, I did. They were, let's see, can I remember their names? One was Grace. She lived just a couple houses away from me. And one was the boy that lived on the corner, Dean Driscoll. I'll never forget. I had such a crush on that guy. I don't think he ever knew it. But, oh, did I have a crush. Oy. He was on the corner, and we were 2 or 3 houses. He had to go back past our house, you know, to go to school. Good looking, tall. You know, blonde. He wasn't Jewish. But nice, awfully nice guy. And that was before Grandpa. There was a time before Grandpa, believe it or not. It's hard to believe, because we were what? I was what? Well, at my 16th birthday party, which was in Chicago, we had moved to Chicago just not long before my 16th birthday party. Grandpa was there, and a couple other guys that I liked or liked me. Anyway, so he got one letter of my name, and the others got another letter of my name, and I had a great 16th birthday party.
Mm-hmm.
It was wonderful. I'm talking too much.
No,
this is perfect. We're going
perfect.
through you, and then we're going to go through Grandpa. So the next thing we want to know is just some generic activities, games, things that you were involved in growing up, sports, activities, and then also what kind of things you would do for entertainment on weekends, what kind of things you and your friends would do, all that.
Well, there wasn't much entertainment, I must say. Ice skating was a big deal in winter, and we did a lot of that. That was wonderful. Other than that, we just went to each other's houses. I had 3 very close friends. One was a little bit younger. You may have heard me speak about Muriel Kalmanson-Klitzner that lives in California now. The other 2 are not alive. exactly patsies or really good kids. I mean, should I really tell you all?
Yes, let's hear all about it.
Yeah.
They used to come to my house because my mother was working, my father, and there was nobody home. So I don't know how we got it, but we got cigarettes. I'm not quite sure how. So we'd stand by the window and we'd blow out the window, the smoke from the cigarettes. It shouldn't smell in the house. That was our big pastime.
And that was before you knew that they were bad for you and harmful.
Oh my gosh, that was last century.
Yeah.
We knew it was wrong. We knew we shouldn't be doing it at our age. But I suppose that just made us do it all the more,
And then what about school activities? Did you do any sports or clubs or anything? Was there anything like that or not really?
There was, but I'm not sure I took part in much of it. In the choir, the a cappella choir.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
That I was in. And that was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was my main activity. And then when I came to Chicago, that really stood me in good stead because the a cappella teacher in high school, in Lakeview High School, which is where I came to as a junior, saw to it that I met a very wonderful person whose name was Naomi. Naomi Goldman was her maiden name. And she took me under her wing and took me to Anshiamet, where her father was the rabbi, Solomon Goldman. He was a very well-known and wonderful man. And she took me there. And that's where I met Grandpa and where my life just took hold. I was in the choir at Anshiamet. We have wonderful choir directors. You've never heard of them. Mr. Harry Cooper Smith was a wonderful musician. And a couple of others. And that I really loved. And so I went every Friday night to services because I was in the choir. And so this one came along, not with me. I would find him when I came down from choir for the lecture, for the rabbi's lecture. There he was.
He's a man that knows what he wants.
Pardon me?
A man that knows what he wants.
Yeah.
Oh, he just evidently made up his mind and nothing. I went away to school. My parents deliberately sent me to the University of Wisconsin so I would meet some other people, I mean, that was a logical thing. He didn't change schools. He was at Northwestern, but he called every single night. And I had to come in for Ronald's bar mitzvah, for Marshall's bar mitzvah, for whatever it was, I had to come in for the occasion.
All right. The last thing we'd like to know, then we're going to get to you, Grandpa. We're almost
I
there.
hope so. I feel I've taken...
This is really perfect. But the last question is just if you and your family ever went on vacations or if you did anything like that.
We had one vacation that I will never forget because it was one with the whole family. We drove to Rapid City, South Dakota. I don't know if you know what is in Rapid City, South Dakota. That's the Black Hills. And that is our only claim to fame. Otherwise, South Dakota is flat. And like Grandpa says, you can look further and see less there than any place else he knows of. But we all went to Rapid City, and we spent, I don't know, maybe 10 days there. And that was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
The whole family was there. And that was a very wonderful vacation. I'll never forget it. It was the only one. It was the only one we ever went to. So That's my story, and I'm sticking to it, as your father would say.
We actually do have one more question for you,
Okay.
Graham. About the Great Depression, what it was like living through it, how it affected your family as you were growing up. Anything you can remember about living through that.
It wasn't fun. I must tell you, it was not fun. And we felt it in Aberdeen because my father was in business. He had purchased umbrellas from someone that was selling them, that was representing a Chinese company. And they were silk. They were silk umbrellas. And the drought was at the same time as the Depression, and there was a real drought in Aberdeen. It didn't rain for months, months and months and months. The poor farmers were really having a hard time. And so were we in the retail business. And he had these silk umbrellas that rotted because they were not sold. And he'd had them for years. He couldn't get rid of them. There was no rain. Nobody wanted an umbrella. So they rotted. I'll never forget that as a child.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a wonderful store. It was a department store. It was next to the largest in Aberdeen. And Christmas, my dad would put in a toy department in the basement with the Santa Claus and toys and all the decorations and all of it. And I used to have the biggest time playing with the toys and with everything decorated. It was lots of fun. Lots of fun. Geez, I haven't thought of these things.
Yeah.
One thing reminds you of another.
Yeah. All right, well, I think we're going to move on over to Grandpa now.
I think it's about time.
Grandma had more to say than I do.
It's about time.
So, Grandpa, you're going to hear a lot of the same questions, but let's start by going over your family as far back as you can remember. Your ancestors, their relations to you, where they're from, basically your whole family tree.
Well, I never met either grandfather and only one grandmother. But I do know the first member of my family who came over from Lithuania was my great-grandfather. This is quite early. And he was the first one. My father was born in Chicago. My mother was born in New York. I was born in Chicago. My great-grandfather was a great scholar, but he was sickly and I think he died rather young. I don't know anything about my grandfather, my father's father. I'm talking about my father's family now, not my mother's family. Mm-hmm. And they were the ones as I grew up in my own family, we were, at least we knew when we visited with my father's brothers. My father had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and we visited with them all. Now my mother had a very small family. Her father, I don't know where he was born, probably in Russia, but he went to Israel when he was a young man as a pioneer to work the land. But after 2 years in Israel, he got malaria, known as the fever. And because of that, after 2 years, he had to come here. And that's where he met my grandmother. Where she was born, I don't know. But they met here, I suspect, in Chicago. They had 2 children, my mother and my Uncle Frank. My Uncle Frank, a very quiet man, who was a teacher. He taught history at Lane High School all his life. My mother was a teacher, and then met my father and married him. He was a lawyer, but he gave up the law and became a salesman for a meat company and then he went into business for himself in 1921, the year that I was born. I knew, of course, his mother, because she lived with us for a while. And I knew her, that's the only one of my relatives of that generation that I did know. I knew some uncles, I knew my aunts, I knew my mother's brother, who was a very fine man. He tried to teach me golf. He was a great golfer. But I was only 12 years old. I didn't take it I took it very well, but my mother would make him take me. He didn't want to play golf. But then he lived with us, and when he married, they both lived with us because they were both teachers. And in those days, teachers didn't make money. They made what they call script. They gave them fake money, which eventually they were able to turn into money. But they lived with us, and my father's mother lived with us, and my father built a business, and we lived rather well. I think, well, that brings you up to date, I think. I had two brothers. One was named Marshall, one was named Ronald. Ronald is still alive. He's works in Tenafly, New Jersey, and lives near there. My brother Marshall was always in Chicago, but he was sickly and died several years ago. And he left 3 children, whom I do see from time to time. That brings us up to date to our own marriage.
Well, how about your sisters and what their names were? And if you could just list the order you were born.
Pardon, about a sister?
You said you had 2 sisters?
No, I had 2 brothers. I did have a sister, but she was stillborn at birth. She died. But I had 2 brothers, and they were the only relatives in my generation that I had.
And what was the order you were born?
Oh, I was first of the ones that lived. Marshall was second, and Ronald was third.
Okay, and we should do this for you too, Grandma. Can you just say your full birthday?
My birthday is October 8th, 1921.
And Grandma?
July 24th, 1922.
Okay. And do you remember anything about your brother's spouses, significant others, what their names were? And what your brother's
Spouses.
wives were, what their names were, what they did?
My brother Marshall was married first to a woman named Phyllis Blair, and then to a woman named Sue. I don't know her last name. Do you? I don't think so. We don't know. She's still alive. And we don't see her much, but we did at one time. Ronald married I forget her name. A woman that he divorced. Then he married his current wife, Gail. She and Ronald have lived very well in New Jersey.
Okay.
Okay, so why don't you tell us now where you were born, how long you lived there, did you ever move?
Well, I was born in, as I say, October 8th, 1921. The first place I lived, I don't remember because I was much too young, was on the south side of Chicago, about 5500 South Michigan Boulevard, somewhere around there. Then we moved north. And we moved west. I went to my first school was called Gregory. I went to kindergarten, probably a few grades, and then went to the grade school that I graduated from called Delano. And then I went from there, I went 1 semester to Marshall High School, but all the rest of my high school career was in Sam. I rarely talk about Marshall, I didn't know much about it. But I was at Sen High School, which was a very fine school at those days. And from there I went to Northwestern University, where I studied for 9 years. Kind of dumb, huh? Anyway, I was working part of the time, sick part of the time. I had to drop out work because of illness. And
Tell them about your
when I was ill, I developed pneumonia. In those days, it was very, very serious. In fact, they had just developed one of the first miracle drugs. If it hadn't been for that, I don't think we'd be talking now. But I took it and recovered. But I was in a hospital, Michael Reese Hospital, and I had a visitor almost every night, which was Joy. Who
Which
is
was
Joy?
Grandma.
Huh?
Which was Grandma. They don't- Okay.
Wait a minute, what'd you say?
I said, which was Grandma.
Oh, Grandma, yeah.
Yeah, not Joy.
Well, Grandma said we had dinner together. It was a very. This was in the special part of the hospital, which was really an elite part of the hospital, and everything was just wonderful. And they served. When I was there, they served Grandma dinner when she was visiting me, and she had dinner. We used to have dinner together in a hospital long before we started going out to the residents. And then I finally recovered, and we went, and we celebrated my recovery by going to the opera. And we were both dressed formal. In those days, you went to the opera in formal. I had tails,
I had a picture.
tux, and I had tails, and a high hat, and all that. I don't remember the opera, but I'm sure it was a good opera.
I don't remember it either.
You don't remember it? I have a picture of us.
I know, we've got a picture, yeah.
Yeah.
You'll have to bring it out and show
Yeah.
it to you. Yeah, that was a very exciting evening.
Yeah. Anyway, I couldn't graduate because I went for several years and I changed my major, and it took several more years. I finally graduated in 1947.
Perpetual student.
And, pardon?
Perpetual student.
Yeah, and then I went to school at night after that until Sharon came, and then after a few months of Sharon being with us, I had to stop schools because we had to take care of Sharon, right?
Well, we're actually going to talk a lot more about that later, but for right now, we're going to focus more on your childhood. Were you named after anybody in particular?
My Hebrew name is Yitzchak, and it was named after a grandfather, I believe. I'm pretty sure it was.
Okay.
Richard was not named after anybody, except that it sounds a little bit like Yitzchak, so I just named it Yitzchak, Richard. I have no middle initial.
Okay. And then we know your parents' names and your siblings' names. Can you describe the relationship you had with your parents and your siblings? Did you get along?
We got along pretty well. I was the oldest, and my interests were always rather independent. And, but whatever, I think we got along pretty well. My mother and I always got along very well. She used to tell me a lot about her childhood, and we really discussed many subjects. My dad was very busy in his work. He was on the road maybe 40 weeks a year. I didn't see him as often. But we would go to Florida. After my illness, I used to go there for a while in the winter time, and my mother and I went. My father would come down for a while and visit with us.
And then I would come.
Yeah, Grandma would come to visit.
Did your brothers go with you?
Yeah, they both would. I don't know. I don't remember them.
They had to, they were too young to leave home.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't remember that too well.
There's a cute story about your mother and me in Florida. May I interrupt?
Of
Please.
course. What's the story? Let's hear it.
I would go down. I was, 6, 7, 9, just 6. I don't think any more than 6. Oh, I had to be.
Sharon,
You.
you're talking about Sharon.
I'm talking about Sharon, not me. She would go down for breakfast, Sharon. And his mother would see her go and let her go while she was watching, and Sharon didn't know she was watching, and then follow her down and have breakfast with her.
She'd listen at the door to see when the other door closed, and then she'd look out.
Yeah. And then
Little Sharon was walking down the stairs.
she didn't want Sharon to know that she was watching her, you know. But she would go down after her, and They would have breakfast. And Sharon learned how to swim there in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
It was, natural. They had pools all over the place,
Mhm.
and the weather and so on.
So was Florida a yearly trip that you guys would always do?
Yeah, we went every year for a while.
And Grandpa, how long were you sick with pneumonia for?
Well, it took me out of school. I was at Northwestern. I had to drop out, so it was probably a few months. So they say in those days it was more serious, much more serious than it is now.
Why did they let me see you?
Why?
Yeah, when you were sick.
Because I wanted to see you.
But I could have caught it.
You know, I asked Dr. Levinson, he told me to tell you to gargle every night, you'd be all right. You were. You'd be all right, and you were. You never got sick.
My health.
But I was over the contagious part a lot too. But I was still too weak. I still had things in my lungs I had to get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
So, Grandpa, another question is, what are some of the most memorable traditions you had with your family? What kind of things did you guys do to pass the time? Did you guys have any, family dinners every week or traditions like that? Anything that was required?
No. I do remember we went to Chinese restaurants. That's why I learned to love Chinese food. But every year we'd go, as I said before, my mother and I would go down to Florida. And then when we were married, we went to Florida. And one time we'd even had a very nice person, an Irish woman, who came with us to take care of the children so we could enjoy the vacation. And she would take care of our little ones. But that was about it. We just went to those occasions. During the summer, we would go with my dad, because he was always on business, and he drove his car, and he took business trips, and we would go along, and that would be our vacation.
That was before we were married.
That was before we were married. I was just a little kid then, I think. And but those are the only vacations. Other than that, I was pretty much independent. I didn't have much to do with anything.
Much to do with your family.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I just went my own way, just sort of peculiar, but I went my own way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then, what kind of things did you do as a child?
Well, I went to Hebrew school for a while, but I caused such a tumult in the Hebrew class, they drove me out every day. And my dad was president of the synagogue and said, it didn't look right. You ought to be a private teacher. But I will tell you one thing. I skipped 2 grades in school, but then I got in with a bad bunch of guys, and I sort of gave up on school when I was in my grammar school days. And in fact, the teachers got upset with me and were going to demote me. Instead of skipping, they were going to demote me. So my mother went to them, and she heard about it, and she said, give me 30 days, and if I can do something with them in 30 days, okay, if not, you demote him. Well, for 30 days, she was as tough as I've ever seen her. And in 30 days, I was the head of the class. Wow. So she really succeeded in her goals, and from then on, there was no talking, demoting me, but I never had much to do with that group of friends that I had made either. But I went to high school, became interested. I had several friends in high school. Go ahead.
No, please keep going.
Go ahead. But tell them what you were active in the...
Well, we used to play a lot of tennis.
Mm-hmm.
No. What were the Jewish organizations?
Oh, I was always active in the synagogue.
And?
Well, what do you mean like the couples club?
No, well, before that.
Well, we went to school, high school. Grandma was in my
I wasn't in your high
Sunday
school.
High school. And then we went to college school together.
In Hebrew, at Anciana.
Yeah,
But I wasn't in your public school. I didn't go to Sen.
No,
No.
she
Okay.
went to Lakeview.
But what was the organization that you and Joe Sofer, or what was the other one's name?
No, there was a group of Jewish young men.
Yeah.
The man, I don't know if you've heard the name of Ben Aronin.
No.
He was an author of children's books, he wrote plays, he was quite a character.
Very well known man.
In those days he was very well known, associated with the Anchemet synagogue. And he created a group called the Herzlians. And he picked out individuals, and he asked those who he thought would someday be very prominent or leaders of the Jewish community, and he took them into this group. We were all together, we were all in our teens. And we made some friendships that lasted throughout our lives.
And you were leaders in that age group of Jewish people.
Yeah, we led a lot of things. I went to the adults. What was the name of downtown? I forget the name of it. It was a school for young people and older people too.
That wasn't Spertus then.
Huh?
That wasn't Spertus then.
No, before Spertus.
Yeah, College of Jewish Studies.
College of Jewish Studies. It was a College of Jewish Studies, and I was trying to do Northwestern at the same time. At a rather young age, I went to college. I was about 16, and it was I just did these things. Just kept studying and learning, and
There was one thing that set you apart a little bit from all the others.
what was that?
One very important thing.
What was that?
You were the only one that had a car.
Right. I had a Chevrolet. My father and mother bought me a new Chevrolet so I could get to all these places in time, including to school. Mm-hmm. And to this day I have friends, I don't see them, they live in different parts of the country, who I used to drive to school when we were in their late teens. And now we're in our late 80s, over middle 80s. And I won't say it, just recently I was talking to one, but we won't go into that.
But what you should tell them is the way you got to Northwestern for an 8 o'clock class or 8:30. What time?
8 o'clock the first semester, then they changed to 8:30.
He was always late.
They figured they were going to lose me if they didn't do something quick. Because actually, a lot of people complained it was a little too early.
Go ahead.
But we would go in the morning with my friends, and at each intersection, I would look to the left, they would look to the right to see if any policemen were there, so we could speed on to the I was always a few minutes late, but I made everything out okay.
All right. Well, again, we're gonna get to that part of your life in a little bit, but we still have a few more questions about when you were a kid.
Okay.
Just curious about, did you ever have family dinners or things that just you and your brothers and your parents ever did on a daily basis or weekly basis that were consistent?
Your Friday night.
No, the only thing I remember, my mother always did the cooking, or even most of the time. She had help in the house all the time. No,
Friday nights.
well, we always had. We cut
Okay,
out.
we'll pause it.